Hi, in this video, I'd like to talk about variables. I want to talk about what they are, why we have them, and how do we use them. We need to talk about good naming convention as well while we talk about variables, and also the data types variables can take on. There's some keywords such as initialization, set reset, math operations, increments and decrements. And then finally, I'd like to end with a task that you can finish of a simple calculator. So let's get started. All right, so what I've done is I've created a Visual Basics form. Let's have a look at it. And I'm just going to double click onto it and open up the form load event. I'm just going to program everything in the form load for now because I don't really need to do anything fancy. So let's create a variable. So to create a variable, let's go dim, we'll type the word dim. So what a variable is, it's a memory that's been declared in RAM. So you create a little memory space for us to use and to put stuff in. And DIM means declare in memory. Now this particular memory needs some kind of identification, such as a name. So let's give this one a name called my integer. Or my temp. Let's just call it my temp for now. My temp. And every data type that exists, a variable can be. And we do need to allocate a data type for it. So we need to tell the computer what type of information do we want to store in this variable. So we go as, let's chuck it as an integer. And then we should store something into it. We should put something when we create it, and 0 is usually the choice. It's not always a choice, but you know, if we're not using it for anything and it's empty at the time, we just put a 0 in there. So this equal means to store 0 into this memory space called my temp that now lives in RAM. So we're going to allocate some memory for us to use, and that's pretty much it. And that's how you create a variable. Now I want to talk about initialization. Initialization means after you create a variable, the first thing you chuck into it as you create it is 0. So therefore we've initialized this variable. Initialized this the my temp variable to the value 0. To the value 0. Now you can initialize it to anything you want. You can initialize it to 4, but the key word here, initialize, means the starting value. What's the starting value for it? Now I could then use my temp, and I could go and allocate 5 to it, which replaces the 4. You notice I don't have to write dim again because I've already created the memory space. I'm just reusing it. So I don't need to declare anything else. And it already knows that it's an integer. Another thing about variables is you can't have spaces as names. Like if I put a space there, you'll error out. You can't have spaces, right? You can't have hyphens in the names. You can't have forward slashes, and you can't have numbers in front of it. But you can have numbers after. So 01 you can write. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing with variables is you notice how I name my naming conventions. I like to, after the second and third letters, or anything after the first letter, I capitalize, so it's just easier to read. This particular naming convention is called Camel Casing. If you capitalize the first one, then that's called Pascal casing. They're used for different reasons. Because this is a private variable inside some kind of event, privates tend to be lowercase. They start lowercase. If you create something at the top here, such as dim my number, for example, you would make this capital my, and then number as, say, integer equals 5, whatever. You can see there. All right, so this is for public, this is for private, basically. So another thing about variables is you will notice that to create a variable, you need to start with dim and then you give it a name. This is an integer, so I might just call this an integer. Now, and then afterwards you give it some kind of data type. Now, the 4 data types we'll mainly use in our course is the integer, the floating point, and there's 2 types of floating points you can use. You can use the double data type. There's no, I don't think floating point actually exists in this language. Floating point, no, it doesn't exist. So double exists. Double is a floating point, and you can put decimal point numbers in here. So this is good for decimal. I'll write that later. And another floating point type. Actually, there's more than one. There's many floating point types, but the 2 that we will use, and the one that I mainly use is double. There is a single, and you can put the same number in there. The only difference between the 2, of course, we can't have the same name. So let's call it O1, because you can't declare memory of the same name. It's like saying, oh, this. It's very difficult to have 2 people in the same class named the same. You know, you gotta try to change the identification of them. Single just uses less memory than double, but single can only, the doubles can make bigger decimal point numbers, or at least decimal point numbers with more decimal place. That's a difference, right? The other one is, the one we'll use is string, you know, for stuff like passwords and names and and anything that requires letters and symbols. So like a message. And the last one we'll use is the Boolean, which allows only true or false. Right. So it's only allowed to have true or false, and that's great for things such as yes or no answers, or something that only has either positive or negative sides to a coin, for example. So they're pretty much the 4 data types we'll be using in our course. Now, another thing with this, let's just go back to our notes here. So I've talked about what a variable is, naming convention, the 4 data types, initialization. Another thing we want to talk about is math operations. And let's just talk about set and reset first, and then math operations. So what does a set mean? So a set basically means you could, my integer, let's just go my integer, and I'll just go equal 5. This is basically the action of set my integer to 5. So if you chuck in a value into this memory space, you've set it. You've set it to a particular value. Now what I could do is then, I don't know, do something to it. I can increment. I can go my integer plus 1, and now I've increment by 1. All right. I could then go before I move on, what does this mean? It means the integer here, the value is 5. I add 1 to 5, and then I store it back into itself. If I wrote this, it won't error, but the value, it actually will error. It doesn't know where to put the result. It doesn't know where to put the 6. Where do I put this 6? Well, you can put it anywhere, and you can put it into yourself again. Basically, adding 1 to yourself. So that's how you do an increment. You can do a decrement. So my integer, you can do a decrement, minus it by 1 again, and it's back to 5, or minus it by 10. And there's another keyword here called reset. What does that mean? It's really in the context of the programmer. If I intended this initial value to be 4 and I want to reset it, it's pretty much just sending it back to 4. Usually a reset goes back to some kind of starting value, and in this one it's 4. I can make it a 0. I'll keep it a 4, and this is a reset back to the original value 4, and that original value is up to you as a programmer. So reset and set, it's kind of the same thing. It just has a particular context. If there's particular values that you deem original or not. All right. Let's have a look at what else we need to cover. So I've done, let's do some more math operations. So let's do some more. So we've incremented, this is a decrement. We decremented by 10, and then we set it back to, and then we reset it back to 4. What else can we do? We can add variables. So my integer, actually let's create a new variable called my dim my result, actually call it my result, and let's grab my integer, and let's add that to my floating point. Now, right now, it's a little bit ambiguous, but let's see if VB is smart enough. This is a floating point double, and this is an integer whole number. Integers are whole numbers, if I didn't say anything. So, I just write here, an integer, just right here, an integer is a whole number. And if you don't put in a whole number, if you're an integer, it will just round it to a whole number. And it usually rounds down. It pretty much just rounds down. It doesn't round up, it rounds down always, no matter what. Okay, so we go dim, and then what we'll do is let's show it. Let's print off what it would look like. So 4 plus 10.4 should be 14.4. So let's go print off. Let's go my result. Let's have a look at what it looks like. Let's run that, see if that works. 14.4, beautiful. So no problems there. All right, now let's have a look at the time. Got a little bit of time left. So so there's a lot of concepts here. Let's just recap. Variables are memory spaces in RAM. They have a particular identification, such as a name you name them, and they're only allowed to store one thing. If you try to store another thing in it, it will just replace it. You can have different data types: integer, double, single, which are both floating point data types. They're decimal data types. You can have a string for letters and symbols. You can have a Boolean, which only allows true or false. You can set them, increment, decrement them, and add and reset them back to a particular value. You just you could basically set it to the original value, and you can add them. What else can you do? You could multiply them. Let's multiply. So this symbol, this star symbol, which is Shift 8, is a multiply. You can multiply them. There you go. You can divide them. / is divide. There you go. And of course you can minus them. There you go. I wonder if you can do it to the power of. To the power of. So basically I'm saying 4 to the power of 10.4. That's huge. Let's go 4 to the power of 2.0. That should be 4 times 4, which is 16. Does it work? Does it work? Yes, it does. So to the power of also works. Great. All right. Now, what I'd like to do now is show you the task that relates to this particular topic. And the task is, should be on Teams, but we'll go here. Programming. So the task is Simple Calculator 04 here, Simple Calculator. So if you go into Simple Calculator in our Teams, class materials, Unit 1 and 2, Programming Task, Simple Calculator, and there's a document. Double click on document, and you're pretty much going to create this particular little thing. And here's some of the code that we want to follow. So basically, the idea is I put numbers in here. If I press plus, it will add those and display. If I put numbers in here, and if I put times, it will display. It works very similar to how I use variables here. So if I had some numbers in here, I would add it, and then I would display it using, you can use, well, I'm not using a text box, we're using a text box, not a message box in actual task. All right, I'm gonna stop here, and in the next video, I'll actually start the calculator with you.